Welcome to Jolene's Stories, where a woman who gave everything finally reclaims it.
My name is Kelly Foster. I am 55 years old. On the evening of October 12th, 200 people sat in the grand ballroom of the Worthington Hotel in Columbus, Ohio, watching my husband raise a champagne flute and call me the love of his life. 30 seconds later, those same 200 people heard his voice come through the ballroom speakers. Not the voice they knew, not the warm baritone that charmed church elders and city council members, but the real one. The one reserved for phone calls he thought I would never hear. "She's too simple to read a balance sheet," he said into the silence of his own anniversary party. "She thinks she's losing her mind like her mother did." 200 forks stopped moving. 200 faces turned toward the head table. And Greg, my Greg, everyone's Greg, went white from the collar up. But I need to go back. Because the woman who pressed play on that voicemail was not the woman who married him. She had to be built, piece by piece, over 3 terrible weeks. And what she carried into that ballroom would dismantle not just a marriage, but an empire of lies 30 years in the making. If that moment just made your stomach tighten, you already know what kind of story this is. Welcome back to our channel, the place where we sit with the stories most people are too polite to tell. Stories about the ones who smile in public and destroy in private. Stories about what happens when the mask finally comes off, not in a therapist's office, not in a quiet conversation, but in front of every single person who believed the lie. If you have ever loved someone the whole world admired and wondered if you were the only one who saw the truth, this one is for you. Hit subscribe, leave a comment, and stay with me. Because what happened in that ballroom changed everything. And to understand how I got there, you have to go back 22 years, to the day Greg and I signed the deed on a little duplex on Bryden Road, and I believed we were building something together. We bought Unit 7 in 1998, a brick duplex with a cracked front step and a kitchen that smelled like the previous owner's cigarettes. I was 33, licensed for 2 years as a real estate appraiser, and Greg had just passed his property management certification. We stood in the hallway of that duplex with a Polaroid camera and took a picture of ourselves holding the deed. Both our names, Kelly and Greg Foster, right there on the Franklin County Recorder's stamp. Greg framed that photo, hung it in the hallway of our home on Indianola Avenue, where it stayed for 28 years. I walked past it every morning on my way to make coffee. It was the first thing I'd see when I came home late from a site visit. It meant something to me. 2 names on 1 piece of paper. A partnership. By 2004, we had 6 units. By 2010, 14. I handled outside appraisals, commercial clients, banks, estate work, and Greg managed our portfolio. He collected rent, paid contractors, filed taxes, controlled the bank accounts. He was good at it, or at least he was good at making it look like he was good at it. I didn't question the arrangement because it made sense. I was out in the field 5 days a week crawling through crawl spaces and measuring lot lines. He was at the desk. Division of labor. Partnership. Our daughter Brianna was born in 1998, the same year we bought Unit 7. She grew up watching her father charm a room the way some men throw a football. Effortlessly, instinctively, with a kind of grace that made everyone around him feel included. Greg was the man who remembered your kid's name at the church potluck, the man who brought a casserole when your mother was sick, the man who stood up at fundraisers and wrote checks with a flourish and a joke that made the whole table laugh. Columbus loved Greg Foster. Our church loved him. The elder board loved him. City council members called him by his first name. He was the kind of man people described as one of the good ones, and when they said it, they always looked at me like I should be grateful. I want to tell you about a Sunday in March of 2019. Greg had spent the morning at First Community Church, where he served on the elder board. He shook hands with every person in the lobby. He told Mrs. Henderson her new hat was stunning. He asked about Pastor David Calloway's daughter's college applications. He handed me a coffee in the parking lot and opened my car door and kissed my temple in front of 3 families walking to their minivans. That afternoon, at our kitchen table, with Brianna's framed graduation photo watching from the shelf, he looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "Kelly, you left the checkbook in the car again. That's the 3rd time this month. You know, your mother started with little things like this too." He said it the way you'd say someone left the oven on. Casual. Almost kind. And my hands went cold because my mother had died of early onset Alzheimer's at 62, and I had spent the last decade terrified that every forgotten appointment, every misplaced key, every name that slipped my mind was the beginning of the same road. Greg knew that fear. He had held me while I cried about it. He had driven me to the neurologist 3 times, and he used it. He used my deepest, most private terror, like a tool. Like a wrench he kept in a drawer and pulled out whenever I got too close to the numbers. That's what I need you to understand before anything else. The money was the mechanism, but the weapon was my mother's disease. The weapon was Greg's voice, soft and concerned, saying, "Honey, are you sure you're remembering that right?" Every time I noticed a discrepancy in the rental income. The weapon was the look he'd give me. Sad, patient. The look of a man burdened by his wife's decline that made me apologize for asking. I stopped questioning the books in 2016. Not because I trusted him, because I stopped trusting myself. If you have ever been in a relationship where someone you loved made you doubt your own mind, where their concern felt like a cage dressed up as a hug, then you already know the specific flavor of hell I lived in. It doesn't look like abuse from the outside. From the outside, it looks like devotion. From the outside, Greg Foster was a saint for staying patient with a wife who was clearly struggling. I heard that exact phrase at a dinner party once. Greg is such a saint for being so patient with Kelly. The woman who said it was sitting 3 feet from me. She said it like I wasn't there. Or like I was there but couldn't understand the words. Greg squeezed my hand under the table and I squeezed back, because what else could I do? What else could I possibly do? I tried once. In 2018, I told my friend Janet Brenner, who I'd known since Brianna's kindergarten class, that something felt off with the finances, that Greg controlled everything and I couldn't access the accounts. Janet looked at me with that particular tilt of the head that means someone feels sorry for you but doesn't believe you. "Kelly," she said, "Greg adores you. Everyone can see that. Maybe you're just stressed. Have you tried that meditation app I told you about?" I didn't bring it up again. Not to Janet. Not to anyone. Because the problem wasn't that I didn't have evidence. The problem was that Greg's performance was too good. His public face was so perfectly constructed that questioning him was like questioning gravity. You just sounded crazy. And every Sunday, without fail, Greg's mother Margaret would sit at our dinner table and pat my hand and whisper, "You're so lucky to have my Gregory." 9 years, she said that. 9 years of Sunday dinners. 3,285 days of smiling at a woman who was looking me in the eye and lying. But I didn't know that yet. Not then. Not until the number in Cincinnati. Let me tell you about the day the ground moved. It was a Tuesday in September, 3 weeks before the gala. I was sitting in my office on East Broad Street, finishing an appraisal on a duplex 2 blocks from our Unit 12. The buyer, a woman named Sandra Okafor, was on the phone reviewing comparable rents. She said it offhand, the way you'd mention the weather. "Well, the Foster's units on that block rent for $1,800, so I'm comfortable with the valuation." My pen stopped. I said, "$1,800? Sandra laughed. "Give or take. That's the going rate over there. Your husband does well with those places." I thanked her. I hung up, and I pulled up the county tax filings on my office screen because I am a licensed real estate appraiser in the state of Ohio, and I have professional access to every recorded property document in Franklin County. Greg's books showed our 14 units generating $1,100 per unit per month. The county records showed $1,800. My hands went numb the moment I saw the discrepancy. Not cold. Numb. Like the blood had decided to leave my fingers and go somewhere safer. I pulled 22 years of filings that afternoon. I used my professional credentials and I was methodical about it because that is what I do. I assess value for a living. I measure things. I verify numbers against reality. And the reality was this: 14 rental units generating $287,000 annually. Greg's reported income on our joint filings, $176,000, a gap of $111,000 every single year. For 22 years, $1,190,000 funneled into 3 bank accounts in Cincinnati that I had never seen, never been told about, never even suspected. Because every time I got close to a question, Greg's voice would go soft and sad and say, "Kelly, honey, your memory again." I sat in my office chair for 45 minutes without moving. The cursor blinked on the screen. The September light came through the blinds in yellow bars across the tax documents. And something inside me, something that had been flexible for 22 years, something that bent every time Greg patted my hand and suggested I was confused, went rigid. I felt it like a physical thing, like a bone setting, like something that had been broken was finally being put back into place, and the snap of it hurt, but the hurt was clean. I wasn't losing my mind. I had never been losing my mind. My mother's disease was real and terrible and mine to grieve, but it was not mine to suffer twice, once in watching her disappear, and once in being told I was disappearing too. Greg had taken my grief and turned it into a leash, and for 22 years, I had worn it. 2 days after I found the Cincinnati accounts, a name surfaced in the utility records for the storage unit Greg kept downtown: Diane Kowalski. I knew the name the way you know a forgotten song. It was there, somewhere, a utility bill I'd noticed years ago and filed away as unremarkable. Diane had been Greg's bookkeeper for 18 years. He'd fired her in 2021 without severance, without explanation, and told me she'd been sloppy with the books. I hadn't questioned it. Of course I hadn't. Diane called me. She didn't introduce herself with small talk. She said, "Mrs. Foster, he thinks loyalty is something you buy. I'm giving mine away for free." We met at a Panera on Morse Road on a Wednesday morning. She brought a canvas tote bag. Inside that bag was a flash drive and a printed summary. 940 pages of parallel accounting records she had kept in a locked filing cabinet in her own home for 18 years. Every transaction, every forged expense report, every wire confirmation. Diane had known from year 3 what Greg was doing. She'd kept the records because she was meticulous by nature, and because she understood even then that a man who steals from his own wife will eventually need a scapegoat. When he fired her without severance, her personal insurance became her donation. What Diane kept in that filing cabinet rewrote every number I thought I knew. I sat in my car in the Panera parking lot and read for 3 hours. The flash drive contained scanned images of wire transfers to Cincinnati, copies of forged notary stamps, and one document that made me grip the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. A title transfer for Unit 7, our first property, the duplex on Bryden Road. In 2009, Greg had removed my name from the deed using a forged notarization. The framed photo in our hallway, both names, Kelly and Greg Foster, was hanging above a lie. My name had been erased from the partnership 10 years into the marriage, and I had walked past that frame every morning believing I was still on it. Greg's mother, Margaret, received $2,400 a month from the hidden accounts. 9 years. The woman who patted my hand at Sunday dinner and whispered about my luck. She was on the payroll. She knew. She had always known. And Pastor David Calloway, the man who counseled me through what he called marital doubts, who told me to trust your husband's leadership, who prayed with me in his office while I cried about feeling confused and disconnected, had co-signed the lease on the storage unit where Greg kept the safe deposit box with the Cincinnati account information. The same pastor, the same hands that held mine in prayer, the same voice that told me to submit and trust. And then Brianna, my daughter, 28 years old. She had been receiving $3,200 a month from Greg's hidden account since her freshman year at Ohio State. Money, she told me, came from a merit scholarship fund, a fund that never existed. I found the wire confirmations in Diane's records, monthly transfers from Cincinnati to Brianna's account, labeled Educational Stipend, starting September 2016. My daughter had been living on stolen money for 10 years and telling me it was earned. I do not know, even now, whether Brianna knew where it came from. The evidence suggests she didn't. Greg told her it was a scholarship, and she was 18 and believed her father. But she kept the secret. She never mentioned the amount. She never asked why her mother didn't know. And every time she called home and said, "I'm doing fine, Mom. The scholarship covers everything," she was part of the architecture of the lie, whether she knew it or not. The gala was 3 weeks away. Greg had booked the grand ballroom at the Worthington Hotel for our 30th anniversary. 200 guests, co-workers, church elders, city council contacts, neighbors, friends. He had designed the evening as a celebration of our marriage, or rather, as a celebration of himself as a husband. A slideshow, a champagne toast, a speech he'd been practicing in the bathroom mirror. I knew because I heard him through the door, adjusting his inflection on the phrase, "the woman who made all of this possible." He meant it as a tribute. I understood now that it was a confession. I had 3 weeks, and I had one ally I hadn't expected, Ray Calloway, Greg's former business partner, whom Greg had publicly sued 5 years earlier for stealing $89,000 from their shared investment account. The lawsuit had destroyed Ray's marriage, his credit rating, and every friendship he had in Columbus. Ray had been cast out. The thief, the betrayer, the cautionary tale Greg told at dinner parties about the importance of trust. Ray found me through Diane. He called from a blocked number. He set his coffee down and asked, "How long?" When I said 22 years, he didn't even blink. He said, "I lost my wife, my house, and every friend I had over his lie. If you're ready, I have everything." Ray had bank records proving Greg fabricated the entire embezzlement claim to mask his own transfers. The $89,000 Ray allegedly stole had been moved by Greg into the Cincinnati accounts 2 days before the lawsuit was filed. Greg had framed him, and the community had believed it because Greg's face was the one they trusted, and Ray's was the one they were told not to. Greg surprised me with a pearl necklace the week before the gala. He came home on a Thursday with a velvet box and the smile he saved for moments when he wanted to be adored. "For the gala," he said, "you deserve something beautiful." I clasped it around my neck in the bathroom mirror while Diane's flash drive sat in my purse on the counter, 6 inches from his hand. I thanked him. I smiled. I told him it was perfect, and it was the last performance I would ever give for Greg Foster. That week tested me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Greg was warm, generous. He brought me coffee in bed. He asked about my work with genuine seeming interest. He suggested we take Brianna to dinner before the gala. Just the 3 of us, like old times. This was his charm offensive, though he didn't know I'd named it that. This was the Greg the world loved. Attentive, thoughtful, present. And standing in the kitchen watching him hum while he cooked, I felt the doubt rise like nausea. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the numbers had an explanation. Maybe Diane was bitter and Ray was vindictive and I was... There it was, the old reflex, the 22-year groove in my brain. Maybe I was confused. Maybe my memory was going, Maybe Greg was right about me. I set my coffee down and walked to my office and opened the county tax filings on my screen. The numbers had not changed. The numbers never changed. The numbers were the only thing in my life that had never lied to me. I closed the laptop just as Greg appeared in the doorway. "Working on a client appraisal?" he asked, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed. My heart slammed once, hard. "The Morrison property," I said. "Due Monday." He nodded and walked away. I did not breathe for 6 full seconds. In the remaining days, I met with Ray twice. He brought a printed timeline of every lie: the lawsuit, the fabricated evidence, the hidden transfers. He brought a statement he was willing to read aloud. I asked him if he was sure. He looked at me with the particular steadiness of a man who has already lost everything and has nothing left to protect. "Kelly," he said, "that man took 5 years of my life and called it justice. I will stand in that ballroom and say it to his face and to the face of every person who believed him." Diane gave me her authorization to project the ledger pages. She would not be at the gala. She had no interest in spectacle, but she wanted her work to speak. 940 pages, she said. Every one of them is a day he thought no one was watching. I prepared a playlist on my phone. 1 track. The voicemail Greg had left his mother, forwarded accidentally by Margaret's new smartphone. The one she hadn't learned to use properly. The one that auto-corrected her contacts and sent messages to the wrong Kelly. "Mom, relax. Kelly's too simple to read a balance sheet. She thinks she's losing her mind like her mother did. As long as I keep suggesting it, she'll never question a single number." His voice. His actual voice. The one he used when no one was supposed to be listening. I had listened to it 40 times. I would play it once. For 200 people. The morning of October 12th, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror in a black dress I'd bought specifically for this evening. Not the dress Greg suggested. The red one, the one he liked because it made him look generous for having a well-dressed wife. The black one. My choice. I put on the pearl necklace because every prop has its purpose. I checked the flash drive in my clutch. I checked my phone. I checked the printed timeline Ray would carry in his jacket. I looked at myself in the mirror and I did not recognize the woman looking back. And for the first time in 22 years, that felt like a good thing. The woman I'd been, the one who apologized for asking, who thanked him for patience she hadn't needed, who walked past a framed lie every morning. She was still in there. But she was standing behind someone new. Someone with numbers and evidence, and a voice that did not shake. The drive to the Worthington Hotel took 14 minutes. October in Columbus. The trees on High Street just starting to turn. The late light going amber over the storefronts. I drove with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. Diane's flash drive was in my clutch on the passenger seat. My phone was in my pocket with the voicemail cued. The pearl necklace sat against my collarbone, cool and smooth. A gift from a man who did not know it was the last thing he would ever give me. I parked in the hotel garage on the 3rd level. I turned off the engine. I sat in the silence of the car and pressed my palms flat against my thighs and breathed. 1 breath, 2, 3. Then I picked up my clutch and walked toward the elevator. The lobby of the Worthington smelled like white lilies and floor polish. A woman at the front desk smiled at me and said, "Mrs. Foster, the grand ballroom is through the double doors to your left. Your husband is already inside." Of course he was. Greg would have arrived an hour early. He would have checked the seating chart, adjusted the lighting, tested the microphone, confirmed the slideshow. This was his stage. These were his people. This evening was his masterpiece. I walked through the double doors and the ballroom opened up before me. 200 chairs around 20 round tables, white tablecloths, centerpieces of hydrangeas and candles, a projector screen behind the head table where our wedding slideshow was cued. The room was already half full. I saw faces I knew, church members, colleagues, neighbors, City Council member Arthur Greenwood with his wife. I saw Margaret in a blue dress at table 3, her hands folded around a glass of white wine, her smile firmly in place. I saw Pastor Calloway near the bar, his collar crisp, shaking hands with the easy practice of a man who greets for a living, and I saw Greg, at the head table, in a charcoal suit with a pocket square the color of my pearls. He saw me and his face did the thing it always did. The warm opening, the crinkle around the eyes, the slight tilt of the head that said, "You are mine, and I am generous enough to claim you." He crossed the room. He took both my hands. He kissed my cheek in front of 4 people and said, "There she is, the most beautiful woman in the building." I smiled. One last time. The first hour was appetizers and small talk, and the particular hum of 200 people performing social comfort. I moved through the room like I'd been doing it for 30 years, because I had. I complimented Janet Brenner's dress. I asked Arthur Greenwood about the rezoning vote. I listened to Margaret tell a table of women about Greg's childhood piano recitals. I held a glass of wine I did not drink. I watched the clock on my phone. Every handshake, every smile, every "Kelly, you look wonderful tonight," was a second ticking down toward the moment I would end the performance, and the gap between what I was doing and what I was about to do made the room feel like it was vibrating at a frequency only I could hear. Greg gave his toast at 8:15. He stood at the head table with the champagne flute raised and the projector throwing a soft blue light behind him, and every face in the room turned up toward his, like flowers toward sun. He talked about the night we met, at a friend's cookout in German Village, the summer of 1993. He talked about the duplex on Brighton Road, our first investment, the little brick building where our future started. He talked about partnership, about trust, about building something that lasts. He looked at me across the room and said, "Kelly Foster is the woman who made all of this possible. 30 years, 14 properties, 1 beautiful daughter, and 1 very lucky man." The room applauded. Someone whistled. Margaret dabbed her eyes with a cloth napkin. Pastor Calloway raised his glass, and I sat at the head table with the pearls around my neck and the flash drive in my clutch, and I let the applause roll over me like a wave that had been building for 22 years and was about to break. Greg kissed my forehead and said into the microphone, "I worry about her sometimes. She works too hard. She forgets to slow down. But that's just Kelly, always giving, never stopping." I felt the room smile. I felt them see the devoted husband. I felt the suffocating weight of 200 people believing the most beautiful lie in Columbus, Ohio. He set the microphone back in the stand. He sat down. He squeezed my hand, and I let 3 seconds pass. 3 seconds of silence in which the future divided itself into before and after. Then I stood up. I took the microphone from the stand, and the room went quiet the way rooms do when something unscripted happens at a scripted event. Not alarmed yet, just attentive. I could feel the tablecloth brush against my knuckles as I lifted the mic. The condensation from Greg's champagne glass had left a wet ring on the white linen near my wrist. Greg looked up at me with a half smile, expectant. He thought I was going to give a response toast. I could see it in his face. The pleased anticipation of a man who has staged his own tribute and is now ready to receive gratitude. His hand was still resting where mine had been, his fingers curled loosely around the empty air I'd left behind. "Thank you, Greg," I said. My voice was steady. The chandelier above the head table threw small, fractured lights across the ceiling, and I watched one of them slide across Greg's shoulder as he leaned back in his chair. That was a beautiful speech. Before the slideshow starts, I'd like to share something with everyone, a voicemail. The half smile stayed on Greg's face for exactly 2 more seconds. I watched it happen, the way the expression held like a mask that hadn't yet received the signal to change. His eyes moved from my face to my hand, where I was already pulling the phone from my clutch. Then I connected my phone to the ballroom speaker system, the same system the DJ had tested for the slideshow audio, and pressed play. Greg's voice filled the room. Not the warm baritone, not the charming toast giver. The other one. The real one. Mom, relax. Kelly's too simple to read a balance sheet. She thinks she's losing her mind like her mother did. As long as I keep suggesting it, she'll never question a single number. The voicemail ran for 23 seconds. In those 23 seconds, every social contract in the grand ballroom of the Worthington Hotel was voided. The room didn't gasp. It froze. 200 people in various stages of holding forks, lifting glasses, turning to whisper. All of them suddenly statue still. A woman at table 6 had her champagne flute halfway to her lips, and it stayed there, suspended. The bubbles still rising inside the glass as if the wine hadn't gotten the message yet. The only sound after the voicemail ended was the clink of Margaret's wine glass against the table. She had set it down too hard. A small splash of white wine spread across the tablecloth near her wrist, and she did not move to blot it. Her face, the same face that patted my hand every Sunday, that whispered about my luck, looked like someone had pulled a plug somewhere behind her eyes. The color left her cheeks in a way that had nothing to do with the lighting. 11 seconds of silence followed the end of the recording. I counted them. The ballroom's air conditioning hummed overhead, and somewhere in the kitchen behind the service doors, a plate clattered against a counter. Those were the only sounds in a room built to hold 200 voices. Greg's mouth opened. No sound came out. His jaw worked once, twice. The motion of a man whose throat has closed around the first syllable of a word he can't find. His hand moved toward the microphone, and I stepped back, holding it against my chest, and said, "I'm not finished." His hand hung in the air between us for a moment, the fingers still reaching, and then it dropped to the table. The pocket square in his breast pocket, that pearl-colored silk he had chosen to match my necklace, caught the chandelier light, and I thought, he coordinated our outfits for the evening he would be unmasked. He dressed for this like a costume. I turned to the projector screen, where our wedding slideshow had been cued, the curated photos, the smiling decades. I pulled up Diane's ledger pages, 940 pages, but I showed 3. 3 pages of transactions, wire confirmations, and forged expense reports, projected 6 feet tall on the screen behind the head table. The numbers were clear. The routing numbers to Cincinnati were clear. The forged notary stamp that removed my name from the Unit 7 deed was clear. The font was small enough that the people at the back tables had to lean forward, and they did. 20, 30 people craning their necks toward the screen, like congregants straining to read scripture. And I said, "I want to thank Diane Kowalski, Greg's former bookkeeper, who kept 18 years of parallel records. And I want to thank Ray Calloway, who many of you remember Greg suing for embezzlement 5 years ago." The name hit the room like a second detonation. I could see it travel across the tables. People looking at each other, people recalculating, people remembering the lawsuit and the sympathy they'd given Greg, and the judgment they'd passed on Ray. A man at table 11 put his napkin down on the table slowly, deliberately, the way you set something down when your hands need an occupation while your mind catches fire. A woman near the back, I couldn't see who, said, "Oh my God," just above a whisper, and the words carried in the strange acoustics of a silent ballroom the way whispers carry in a cathedral. And then Ray stood up from table 9, where he'd been sitting quietly for the past hour, and walked to the front of the room. His footsteps were the loudest sound in the ballroom. 12 steps from his chair to the head table. I heard each one land on the carpet with the muffled certainty of a man who has nowhere left to fall. He buttoned his jacket as he walked. His tie was navy blue and slightly crooked, and he did not fix it. Greg said, "Kelly, you're confused. You don't understand She understands perfectly," Ray said. His voice cut across Greg's the way a clean line cuts across a smudge. He took the microphone. He was calm. The calmness of a man who had rehearsed this moment for 5 years in the ruins of his own reputation. Everything he accused me of stealing, Ray said, looking directly at the room, not at Greg. He was taking from his own wife. $89,000. That's what he said I took. Here's the wire transfer from his own account moving that exact amount to Cincinnati 2 days before he filed the lawsuit. He held up the printed timeline. The paper caught the projector light, and the ink was visible even from the middle tables. Dates, amounts, routing numbers, printed in 12-point font because Ray was a man who understood that evidence should be legible. He did not raise his voice. I lost my wife. I lost my house. I lost every friend I had in this city. Over his lie. A sound came from Greg. Not a word. Not a protest. Just a short exhalation through his nose, the kind of sound a man makes when he's been hit in the chest and is trying not to show it. His hands were flat on the tablecloth now, pressing down, as if the table might move if he didn't hold it still. The room was breathing differently now. I could feel it. The collective intake. The held breath. The particular quality of air in a space where 200 people are simultaneously revising everything they thought they knew about someone. Arthur Greenwood's wife had her hand over her mouth. Her rings caught the light. 3 diamonds. A wedding set. And I remember thinking how strange it was that I could notice something that small, in a moment, that large. Janet Brenner, Janet who told me to try the meditation app, was staring at the tablecloth like it contained instructions. Her husband had his arm on the back of her chair but was not touching her, as though even the gesture of comfort had become uncertain in a room where every gesture was being re-examined. Pastor Calloway had not moved. His hands were flat on the table, and his eyes were fixed on a point somewhere in the middle distance, and he looked like a man who was calculating the exact velocity of his own involvement becoming public. The candle at his table had burned down to a low flicker, and the flame leaned sideways in a draft from the kitchen, casting a shadow that moved across his collar like a finger pointing. And then Margaret tried to leave. She pushed her chair back from table 3 and picked up her purse, a small cream-colored clutch she held against her stomach with both hands, like armor, and walked toward the side door with the practiced determination of a woman who has spent 9 years collecting $2,400 a month and understands that the accounting has just gone public. Her heels on the ballroom floor made a sound like a clock ticking faster. She was 6 steps from the door when Ray stepped into her path. He held up a printed page. 9 years of monthly payments from the Cincinnati account, he said. Not loud, just loud enough for the tables within earshot to hear. $259,200. Your total, Mrs. Foster. Margaret stopped. Her clutch purse pressed tighter against her body. She looked at him. She looked at me. She did not look at Greg. Her mouth opened and closed once, a motion so small that only the people at the nearest tables would have seen it. And then she turned and stood there, neither advancing nor retreating, a woman caught between a door she couldn't reach and a room she couldn't face. Greg stood up. His chair scraped the floor, an ugly sound in the silence, like a nail across glass. The charcoal suit that had looked so commanding an hour ago now hung on him differently, as though the fabric had noticed the change before the man inside it had. This is insane, he said, but his voice had changed. The warmth was gone. What was underneath was something I recognized from 1,000 private moments. The flat, hard tone he used when he was cornered. The kitchen tone. The bedroom tone. The voice that came out when the audience was supposed to be only me. Kelly, you're embarrassing yourself. You don't... Your memory? You know you have trouble with... I had waited 22 years to answer that sentence. I had answered it in the shower, in the car, in the silence of my office at 11 o'clock at night. I had answered it in every version of myself that had ever known the truth and been too gaslit to say it. My memory is fine, Greg. I said it into the microphone, into the ballroom, into the silence where 200 people could hear not just my words, but the absence of trembling in my voice. It always was. You told me I was losing my mind so I would stop looking at the numbers. But I am a licensed real estate appraiser. I look at numbers for a living. And your numbers are wrong by $111,000 a year. The silence after that. If you have ever been in a room where a truth lands so heavily that it changes the molecular composition of the air, you know the silence I'm talking about. It is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of something new, something that wasn't there before and can never be removed. The hydrangea centerpieces sat untouched on every table. The champagne in 200 glasses had gone flat. The projector still hummed behind me, Diane's numbers glowing on the screen like a verdict written in light. In that silence, every person in the grand ballroom was doing the same math. Every compliment Greg had ever given in public. Every display of devotion. Every Sunday morning handshake. Every fundraiser check. Every champagne toast. All of it recalculated. All of it revalued. And the new number, the real number, was 0. If you are listening to this and you have ever sat in a room full of people who admire the person who hurts you, if you have smiled through a toast given by someone who degrades you in private, I want you to hear what the silence sounds like on the other side. It sounds like the end of a performance. It sounds like 200 people finally seeing the same thing you have seen alone for years. It sounds like being visible, being believed, being real. And if that resonates with you, if you know that specific loneliness, drop a comment and stay with me. Because the silence was not the end. The silence was the beginning. What happened next was not something I planned. I had planned the voicemail. I had planned the ledger pages. I had planned Ray's statement. But I had not planned for Carolyn Webb, Carolyn, who sang in the church choir, who brought casseroles to every potluck, who had known Greg and me for 20 years. To stand up at table 7 and say, in a voice that shook but did not break, "He did the same thing to the building fund. I saw the receipts 3 years ago. David told me I was mistaken." She looked at Pastor Calloway. Calloway looked at the floor. The candle at his table had gone out entirely now, a thin thread of smoke rising from the wick, and he did not seem to notice. And the room understood in that single sentence that the lie was not one man's project. It was an infrastructure. Arthur Greenwood's wife turned to Arthur. Her hand came down from her mouth and gripped the edge of the table. A woman at table 12 whispered something to the man beside her, and he nodded slowly, like a doctor confirming a diagnosis. Janet Brenner looked at me, not at the tablecloth, at me, and I saw in her face the specific expression of a person realizing they had been part of a machine they didn't know they were operating. Her eyes were wet. Her lips pressed together, then parted. She mouthed one word, "Sorry." I held her gaze for 2 full seconds. I did not nod. I did not look away. I let her see that I had received it, and that receiving it was not the same as accepting it. Not yet. That would take time. Greg left the ballroom at 8:47. He did not take the microphone. He did not make a statement. He pushed his chair in, a reflex, the habit of a man who had spent decades performing good manners. And then he walked between the tables with his shoulders pulled in and his eyes fixed forward, and not a single person reached out to stop him. Not one hand, not one voice. The room parted for him, the way air parts for something falling. His footsteps were the only sound, and when he reached the double doors, he did not push them open so much as lean into them, his weight carrying him through, and the doors swung shut behind him with a soft, pneumatic hiss, the sound of expensive hardware closing on a man who could no longer afford the room. Margaret was already gone. She had slipped past Ray when Carolyn spoke, taking the side exit, her cream clutch pressed against her stomach, her heels silent on the carpet now, as though even her shoes understood the value of a quiet departure. Pastor Calloway left 3 minutes after Greg, moving through the lobby with his phone pressed to his ear and his free hand gripping the back of his neck. His collar had come slightly loose. It was the first time in 20 years I had seen him look undone. I set the microphone back in the stand. The click of it settling into the cradle was small and precise. I picked up my clutch. I walked through the ballroom toward the main doors and the faces I passed, some stunned, some angry, some strangely relieved, as though a pressure they hadn't known they were carrying had been released, formed a corridor of recalculation. Someone touched my arm. I don't remember who. The touch was light, tentative, the way you might reach for something you're not sure is real. Someone said, "Kelly." Just my name. Just the sound of it, spoken by someone who meant me, the real me, not the woman Greg had invented. I kept walking. The ballroom carpet was thick under my shoes. The hydrangeas on the tables were still white, still perfect, still arranged for a celebration that no longer existed. I drove home on High Street with the windows down. October air, cool enough to feel like something opening. The street lights on High Street threw orange pools on the pavement, and I drove through them one by one, light, dark, like passing through the bars of something I was leaving behind. The pearl necklace was still around my neck. I unclasped it at a red light on Fifth Avenue and set it in the cup holder. It sat there, luminous and meaningless, a gift from a man who had used my mother's death to keep me blind. The flash drive was still in my clutch, but its work was done. The red light changed to green, and I drove the last 4 blocks home with an empty throat, an empty passenger seat, and a silence in the car that did not feel like loneliness. It felt like space, like the first clear room I had occupied in 22 years. Within 72 hours, the infrastructure of Greg Foster's public life collapsed like a building whose foundation had been quietly removed. The church elder board met on Monday morning at 9 o'clock and voted unanimously, 12-0, with 1 abstention from a member who was out of state, to remove him. Pastor Calloway resigned from the board the same day, citing personal reasons, though by then 3 other choir members had come forward with questions about the building fund. The total discrepancy in the church accounts, as Carolyn Webb's receipts would later confirm, was $47,000 over 6 years. By Tuesday, 3 tenants from our properties had filed formal complaints with the Ohio Attorney General's office, citing discrepancies between what they paid and what was reported. By Wednesday morning, Greg's business credit line at Huntington Bank was frozen. His attorney's office called mine. I had retained counsel that Monday morning, a woman named Patricia Devereaux who specialized in marital fraud and did not smile once during our entire first meeting, and requested a cooling-off period. I did not cool off. Margaret disconnected her phone. I don't mean she stopped calling. I mean she changed her number entirely within 48 hours of the gala. The woman who had sat at my Sunday dinner table for 9 years, who had patted my hand and whispered about my luck while cashing $2,400 a month of my money. She vanished. Her church friends received a brief note explaining she was spending time with family in Kentucky. No one believed it. The truth had made disbelief a luxury no one could afford. And Brianna called. My daughter, 28 years old, sobbing into the phone at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night. Her voice was raw in a way I hadn't heard since she was a child, the uncontrolled crying of someone whose world has tilted and cannot be set right with words. Mom, he told me it was a scholarship. I swear I didn't know. I believed her. I believe her still. Brianna is not her father. She is a young woman who was 18 years old when a man she trusted, a man who was supposed to be incapable of this, handed her a lie shaped like opportunity, and she took it because why wouldn't she? Within a week, Brianna posted a public apology to me on her social media. Within a month, she wired back $124,000 she had saved from the payments. She did not have to do that. She chose to. And that choice, her choice to face the truth and act on it rather than hide from it, told me that whatever Greg planted in her, it did not take root. The pearl necklace sat in my kitchen drawer for 2 weeks before I put it in a box and gave it to Goodwill. I didn't want it. I didn't want anything he had given me after the Cincinnati accounts opened. What I wanted, what I took, was the deed to Unit 7. The real one. The one with both names, before the forged notarization, before Greg erased me from the property we bought together. My attorney filed for restoration of my ownership interest. The process took 5 weeks. The day the corrected deed arrived, I held it in both hands and felt the weight of 2 names on one piece of paper, and this time, I knew what it meant. Not partnership, ownership, my name, my property, myself. Greg attempted damage control. He called guests from the gala, 43 of them in the first week, according to the phone records my attorney subpoenaed. He posted a statement on his social media, vague, lawyered, referencing misunderstandings and personal difficulties. He framed it as a marriage falling apart, not a fraud being exposed. But the voicemail had been heard by 200 people. The ledger pages had been projected on a 6-foot screen. Ray's timeline was being passed hand to hand through the Columbus real estate community like a samizdat pamphlet. Every call Greg made was a call to someone who had already heard the recording. Every reassurance he offered was measured against the sound of his own voice saying, "She's too simple to read a balance sheet." The words followed him. They would follow him for years. His social circle contracted like a muscle pulling away from a wound. The city council contacts stopped returning calls. The couples who used to invite us to dinner, who used to invite Greg, with me as an accessory, removed themselves quietly from his orbit. Not publicly, not with announcements or confrontations, but with the slow, unmistakable withdrawal that is its own kind of verdict. The chair at the elder board meeting that was his for 12 years sat empty. The contractor who had worked on our properties for a decade switched to a different management company. The barista at the coffee shop on Lane Avenue, who used to have Greg's order ready before he reached the counter, started asking him his name. I did not watch this with satisfaction. I want to be honest about that. I watched it with the strange, hollow exhaustion of someone who has detonated their own life to save it. Everything Greg lost was something I lost too. The community, the routine, the version of our family that existed before October 12th. The difference was that his losses were real, and mine had always been illusions. I was grieving things that never existed. He was losing things he never deserved. 3 months later, I sat alone in the empty apartment above Unit 7. The duplex on Bryden Road, the first property we bought together. The one with the cracked front step and the kitchen that used to smell like cigarettes. The apartment was bare. The tenants had moved out during the legal proceedings. The walls were white and scuffed, and the November light came through the window in thin gray bars, and the only sound was the radiator clicking as it warmed. The floorboards were cold under my shoes. A water stain on the ceiling had dried into a shape like a half-closed eye, and I sat beneath it on the bare floor with my back against the wall, and my coat still buttoned. I held the original deed, the corrected one, with both names restored. I ran my thumb across the county recorder's stamp, and I felt grief. Not for the marriage, not for Greg, not for the 30 years, but for the woman I was before he convinced me I was losing my mind. I missed her. The woman who questioned numbers without apologizing, the woman who trusted her own perception, the woman who didn't need someone else's voice to confirm what her eyes were reading on the screen. I missed trusting myself. I was learning how again. Some mornings were harder than others. Some mornings I still woke up and reached for the phone to check a number twice, 3 times, because the old voice in my head, his voice, gentle and devastating, still whispered that I might be wrong, but the numbers never lied. And every morning I checked them and they were right. The voice got a little quieter. The radiator clicked 3 times in a row, then settled. Outside the window, a car passed on Brighton Road with its headlights cutting through the late afternoon gray, and for a moment the light swung across the wall and touched the water stain and moved on, and the room was mine again. Just mine. The quiet was not an absence. It was a room with only one voice in it, and that voice was my own. I used to believe that loyalty meant silence, that protecting someone's reputation was the same as loving them. I was wrong. Loyalty without truth is just complicity with better lighting. And the people who tell you to be quiet, the ones who say trust your husband, trust the process, trust the system, sometimes they are not protecting you. Sometimes they are protecting themselves from having to act on what they already suspect. If someone you love has ever made you question your own memory so you would stop looking at the numbers, you are not crazy. You never were. The spreadsheet does not lie, even when they do. This story has been told. One pearl necklace clasped around a neck that was about to speak the truth. One flash drive carried into a ballroom that will never feel the same. And one deed with 2 names restored. If you have ever sat in silence while someone performed devotion in public and delivered cruelty in private, if you have ever wondered whether the problem was your memory or their honesty, tell me, what was the moment you finally stopped believing their version? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe if this